The Iraq War, Operation Iraqi Freedom.
To accurately understand the Iraq War, let's take a look at its historical context. First, tensions between the US and Iraq were initially formed by the end of the Gulf War. The war caused disputes over Iraq's access to weapons of mass destruction and chemical warfare. At the end of the war, the dictator of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, sent Iraqi forces to suppress rebellions led by the Kurds and Shiites in Iraq. U.S. forces decided not to intervene with these uprisings, and U.S. military intelligence began to investigate Iraq's weapon supply and considered Hussein as a threat. On September 11, 2001, a terrorist group from Saudi Arabia named Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 U.S. commercial passenger planes. The first and second planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing both towers to collapse. The third plane crashed into the Pentagon, located just outside of Washington, D.C. The fourth plane crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The tragic attack sparked immense fear within the American public. They linked the terrorist attacks to Iraq and Saddam Hussein, even though there was no evidence that the Iraqi government had any part assisting Al-Qaeda. In response to the attacks themselves and the fear of the American people, U.S. President George W. Bush announced a plan to wage war in Afghanistan and Iraq. This plan was a part of the global war on terror. The plan included a series of defensive strategies for the U.S. to combat the nations they identified to be dangerous and eliminate terrorist threats. In President Bush's State of the Union address, he identified Iraq as part of an axis of evil. This axis referred to Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. Bush declared that Iraq was a growing danger to the U.S. and world peace. He wanted to assure the fearful American people that the U.S. would win the war on terror and would prove successful in eliminating all terrorist threats. In his address, he made the American people 3 promises. He said, "We will win this war, we'll protect our homeland, we will revive our economy." After thorough research, we argued that the cost of the Iraq War was not worth the gain.
To help you understand our claim, let's start by looking at the causes of the Iraq War. President Bush felt the U.S. was extremely vulnerable because of the 9/11 attacks and Iraq's alleged possession of weapons of mass destruction, which are weapons that can cause harm to a lot of people. Also, the U.S. feared Iraq's continuous support for terrorist groups. These reasons justified the U.S.'s war with Iraq. The information provided by the United States intelligence community and the U.S. Military Intelligence Corps in the October 2002 National Intelligence Estimate further solidified Bush's decision to enact war. The reports confidently judged that the Iraq government had chemical weapons in the capital of Baghdad, was advancing its offensive biological weapons program, and was reconstituting its nuclear program. However, later analysis revealed that the information in the reports was vastly overstated. Consequently, the false information resulted in Bush to further justify the need for the U.S. to go to war with Iraq. There were 2 main triggers to start the Iraq War. First, in November 2002, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 1441. This resolution gave Iraq one final chance to disarm their weapons or they would face serious military consequences. Then, on March 17, 2003, President Bush gave Hussein an ultimatum to either leave Iraq or face severe military conflict. The ultimatum was not fulfilled by Hussein, as war started 3 days later.
So, who are the major players? For the U.S., it was President Bush, Secretary of Defense Donald Henry Rumsfeld, Commanding General Tommy R. Franks, U.S. Ambassador Paul Bremer, President Barack Obama, who was elected after President Bush, 170,000 U.S. troops, and the U.S.'s main ally, Great Britain. For Iraq, it was dictator Saddam Hussein, the Ba'ath Party, who was an extreme religious militia, the main Iraq forces, which were the Republican Guard, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, 350,000 total Iraqi troops, and Iraq had no major foreign allies.
To remain on offense during the war, the U.S. used several strategies to rapidly defeat Iraqi military and parliamentary forces. These strategies included using series of airstrikes, launching precision-guided bombs, seizing Iraq's capital of Baghdad, capturing Saddam Hussein, and seizing the major city of Fallujah. To strengthen their invasion forces, the U.S. deployed more than 30,000 more troops in 2007. This was known as the U.S.'s surge of troops. To defend against the U.S.'s aggressive strategies, Iraqi forces showed massive resistance. they used guerrilla warfare, which is irregular military tactics, by burning bridges and setting oil wells on fire. Also, smaller militias like the Ba'athist Party fought alongside main Iraqi forces. Now let's talk about the main events. On January 29, 2002, President Bush delivers his State of the Union address. On March 20, 2003, President Bush officially declares war in Iraq. Since Hussein refused to leave Iraq, US and Allied forces launched an attack in which they dropped several precision-guided bombs on a bunker complex where Hussein was believed to be residing in. Phase 1 of the war was from 2003 into 2007. This phase was the initial transition for US troops in Iraq. The US set specific goals to build new political parties, recruit and train new military forces, create a new civil society, and draft laws. On April 9, 2003, US forces captured the Iraq capital of Baghdad. On December 13, 2003, the US executed Operation Red Dawn, and they were able to capture Saddam Hussein in a hole on a farm near his hometown of Tikrit. On April 4, 2004, the US military launched the first Battle of Fallujah with the goal of seizing Fallujah from extreme Islamic insurgents. Although they were able to take a third of the city within a week, due to the considerable destruction of the city and heavy civilian deaths, the Iraqi government pressured American forces to withdraw from the city and abandon the operation on May 1st. After this failed attempt, the US forces fought the Second Battle of Fallujah. From November 7 to December 23, 2004, they finally gained control of the city of Fallujah. The last main event of the first phase of the Iraq War was on December 30, 2006, when Hussein was executed by hanging for the heinous crimes he committed against humanity. Phase 2 of the war was from 2007 to 2011. On January 10, 2007, the US military had a surge of more than 30,000 troops. This added to the 130,000 troops already deployed. On March 30, 2007, the US Senate set March 31, 2008 as the target date for all US troops to leave Iraq. Following President Bush, newly elected President Barack Obama announced a plan to end the US combat mission in Iraq by August 2010. On August 19, 2010, President Obama and US military advisors left Iraq. However, US troops were not fully withdrawn yet. Finally, after nearly 9 years of combat, on December 15, 2011, the US military officially declared the end of its mission in Iraq, and the final US troops withdrew.
The immediate results of the war left major impacts both on the United States and Iraq. There was a total of 1,300,000 civilian casualties. There was over 4,000 US soldiers killed in action. There was 31,994 US soldiers who were injured. The Iraq War initially cost the United States $823.2 billion, and 1.8 million Iraqi refugees were displaced to neighboring countries.
The Iraq War left many long-term results, unfortunately more negative than positive. When looking at casualties, 4,431 US soldiers were killed in action, and 31,994 US soldiers were wounded. Between 182,272 and 204,575 Iraqi civilians were killed, and overall, 250,000 Iraqis were injured. Veterans reported suffering from major health issues. This included being diagnosed with tumors, particularly brain tumors, blood in their urine and stool, sexual dysfunction, migraines, and frequent muscle spasms. Veterans were exposed to burn pits, which were military bases where waste was disposed of by burning. Toxins from these burn pits affected their skin, eyes, respiratory and cardiovascular systems, gastrointestinal tract, and their internal organs. 15.7% of deployed veterans reported experiencing severe PTSD after combat.
At first I believed in the cause, but then I saw what we were doing to the people of Iraq. Innocent people. And then one day, there was a firefight. We bring in the civilian who got killed in the crossfire. I pulled back. That's when I knew I had to get out of Iraq. I just had to wait for my chance.
Innocent civilians were impacted, as 1.8 million Iraqis were displaced to neighboring countries. 1.6 million refugees were displaced inside of Iraq. 100,000 Iraqis fled to Syria and Jordan monthly in order to escape the severe destruction that had occurred in Iraq. 40% of Iraq's middle class left the country, and the war ended up breaking down many of Iraq's cultural institutions. The environment also suffered damages as military vehicles produced 1.3 billion tons of carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, hydrocarbons, and sulfur dioxide. Air pollution from military vehicles and weapons made oil, soot, sulfur, and acid rain pollute the air and surrounding area. This negatively affected the public health of civilians and U.S. service members. The water supplies were contaminated by oil from military vehicles and depleted uranium from ammunition. The war initially cost the U.S. $832.2 billion. Oil prices increased from 2003 to 2008, reducing the U.S. income by $274 billion. In total, the war cost the U.S. $2.4 trillion. The total war cost equates to about $6,300 per U.S. citizen. The war caused the U.S. to expand their government electronic surveillance capabilities. This resulted in them abusing their surveillance powers by gathering information on innocent Americans. Recently, in 2020, the mutual relationship the war established between the U.S. and Iraq suffered serious conflicts and almost fell apart.
Despite the cost, the war improved the relationship between the US and Iraq, and they now recognize their relationship as mutual. Iraq's economy benefited from the increased oil exports and the drop of inflation following 2007. The standards of living for Iraqi citizens were improved. The US helped food and electricity be distributed amongst citizens. Children of all backgrounds are able to attend schools. New business and job opportunities are created. Iraq citizens are now free to travel abroad without facing harsh punishments, and universities and colleges are now available for citizens.
No, clearly, the war harmed the U.S. economy as it caused it to spend $2 trillion in the war. Reduction of oil production caused the U.S. oil prices to greatly rise, and the war reduced the total U.S. income by approximately $274 billion. Actually, the war benefited Iraq's economy. The long-term price tag for the war was $2.4 trillion. The U.S. was motivated to reassert their military dominance after 9/11 left them vulnerable. They wanted to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, end Saddam Hussein's dictatorship in support for terrorism, and they wanted to regain the confidence and trust of the American people. Unfortunately, the U.S. economy suffered and they saw no financial benefits. However, Iraq's economy benefited as they saw a decrease in inflation rates. The U.S. improved living conditions for Iraqi civilians. An alliance was formed between the U.S. and Iraq. The threat of Hussein was eliminated, and the U.S. opened a new embassy in a security district called the Green Zone. Unfortunately, the war caused thousands of deaths and injuries. The U.S. spent trillions of dollars, and they didn't improve their military stance in the world. The war hurt the environment drastically, and it increased violence in Iraq. The war left Iraq with an unstable parliament, as the absence of Hussein allowed neighboring dictatorships to come to power. The war overall caused destruction, sickness, and distress. If the war was not fought, Iraq would still be ruled under Saddam Hussein, who allowed Iraq to have a more stabilized government. The U.S. would have saved trillions of dollars, and thousands of American Iraqi soldiers would still be alive. The U.S.'s relationship with Iraq would have not improved, and the U.S.'s pride would have been badly hurt. This is because if they did not assert their military dominance, they would have stayed fearful and felt vulnerable. Overall, the war was not productive or necessary.